The topic today is when the pandemics come, God's provisions for the terrible emergencies. It's going to include the provisions outlined, the Spanish flu hydrotherapy protocols, the fever diet protocols, fresh air versus infections, and sunlight versus infectious diseases. This is centering on the pandemic of the Spanish flu and other such pandemics in that time, in and around that time. All right, here we go. I am John EverBlest, by the way. The 1918 Spanish influenza pandemic, also known as H1N1 flu, has been described as the greatest medical holocaust in history. It had 4 waves, lasted 15 months, killed an estimated 17 to 100 million worldwide with a global mortality rate of 10 to 20% of those infected. Yet there were some medical institutions that had far fewer deaths than others, some approaching nearly a 100% recovery rate, such as the Battle Creek Sanitarium. The institutions with the greatest success in treating infectious diseases were those that used one or more of God's simple hygienic methods, whether it was the Spanish flu, typhus, influenza, or TB. What they did and their results are laid out here. Soon, the only treatments we will have access to are God's healing agencies of nature. That's why this video is important for such a time as this. And what if, comparatively speaking, COVID was just a wake-up call? A call for much worse things to come. We are warned in Luke 21:11 of increasing troubles as we draw nearer to the end, including famines and pestilences. We are told that disease will increase in proportion to the wickedness of man. With that in mind, there's much more urgency to familiarize ourselves with the provisions God has made for our health. The converging crises on planet Earth are telling us to wake up. Prepare. Prevention is worth far more than cure. All right, God's provisions outlined here, just briefly. The Battle Creek Sanitarium was the flagship of the health reform movement. The sanitarium is the starting point for explaining God's healing provisions because they were the first place they were first to place those provisions on a scientific basis and to use them systematically to both prevent and reverse disease. The sanitarium and Dr. Kellogg became the world famous as a result. So we start with just a tiny little intro to Dr. Kellogg himself. That's, by the way, that picture is the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Oh, look at that. I've got that. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was the medical director of the Battle Creek Sanitarium for 67 years. He was the pioneer of the health food industry, pioneer in light therapeutics, author of over 50 medical books, prolific inventor and innovator, public speaker, world-renowned surgeon. And Dr. Kellogg, yes, he and his brother were the inventors of flaked breakfast cereal. Pure air, sunlight, abstemiousness, rest, exercise, proper diet, the use of air, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies. This simple hygienic system is God's health care for us. These are the provisions for the terrible emergencies. At least these form the basis, the foundation for everything else. These healing lifestyle elements can be traced all the way back to the Garden of Eden. These are what Dr. Kellogg referred to as the old paths, the simple life, the return to nature, and biologic living. All sanitarium patients had these healing agents applied to them by default. These remedies, when used together as a lifestyle, prevented disease. When used as a therapy, they reversed disease. Prevention and recovery were the same thing. Lifestyle and healthcare were the same thing. The first task in ascertaining the cause of a patient's disease excuse me, was to check for deficiencies in these areas of their lifestyle habits. It was the first line of defense and the first line of recovery. The hygienic system focused on strengthening the body's defenses rather than attacking disease. Each of these remedies were very powerful to that end. All right, the water cure. This is the most important. This section is about the hydrotherapy protocols used to treat the 1918 Spanish flu with remarkable success. The first institution to share their protocols, Battle Creek Sanitarium. This is the ladies' hydrotherapy department, one floor out of many. They had over 1,000 different baths and therapies from which to choose from. It was especially hydrotherapy that gave the sanitarium such success in treating the Spanish flu epidemics. The sanitarium had 2 large multi-floor wings dedicated entirely to hydrotherapy. Dr. Kellogg literally wrote the book on hydrotherapy. His methods made the Battle Creek Sanitarium the world leader in all things hydrotherapy. It was just the simple use of hot and cold water to manipulate circulation. That was it. Nothing complicated. Hydrotherapy involved no drugs, nor their side effects or toxins. Hydrotherapy may be utilized by every family member right in their own homes with no cost at all. This is what it did for the sanitarium patients. 1, it quickly boosted their immune system. It raised their body temperature to kill viruses and pathogens. It relieved pain. It brought healing blood and oxygen to targeted locations. It flushed out toxins. It relieved congested organs. It heat-activated internal organs, that's important. It induced sleep and dramatically sped healing. This is Dr. Kellogg's 1918 article containing his protocol for treating patients taken sick by the Spanish flu. It has been outlined in the following slides. This is just a quick overview, not a class on hydrotherapy. Dr. Kellogg said, if the foregoing measures are intelligently applied, the deaths from Spanish influenza or from pneumonia following it will be negligible. Number 1, in his protocol, a glass of water or juice every half hour when awake, 3 to 4 quarts per day. I've tried that once when I was really sick, and I was up, after 2 gallons, I was up and ready to go again. Number 2, chest fomentations twice a day. Number 3, chest compress between fomentations. And there are classes online on what these are and the details of doing each. That's beyond my scope here. Number 4, enemas twice a day. Enema kits can be purchased in drugstores or Walmart or self-administered, and they are very simple. Number 5, this is interesting, an ounce of paraffin oil 3 times per day to promote bowel activity. I don't think they make that anymore. Number 6, gruel mixed with bran to promote bowel activity. Kellogg was very careful with the bowels. He spent a lot of attention on that. Number 7, several days mandatory bed rest after fever subsides. This bed rest was a key factor in recovering. It was a common thread in the successful treatment of the Spanish flu. Now, here's some ifs, ands, or buts. If 1, if patient has a headache, apply a cold compress to head. Okay, we know that. We know from multiple experiences the power of hot and cold to relieve even a migraine headache. If number 2, if patient has a high fever, apply a cold pack immediately after a very short hot blanket pack. Number 3, if. If patient has a fever or pain in back or legs, utilize the short hot bath or the hot blanket pack. All the same principles, just applied just a slight bit differently. He says, if the foregoing measures are intelligently applied, the deaths from Spanish influenza or from pneumonia following it will be a negligible quantity. Hydrotherapy training. Now, the Battle Creek Sanitarium offered hands-on hydrotherapy training for children and families to deal with common ailments and infectious diseases. All right, that's Institute number 1. Let's go to Institution number 2. Hutchinson Seventh-day Adventist Seminary, Minnesota. Number 2, how did they deal with the Spanish flu? This is relevant to us because we're going to have to deal with this stuff all on our own soon enough. So, the story you're about to hear is a remarkable, well, it's just remarkable. This is an article from the Northern Union Reaper, December 17, 1918. Seminary cinches flu. Hutchinson Institution makes a record combating disease, 120 exposed, 90 patients, no deaths, none very sick. Really, during the Spanish flu. This seminary school used Battle Creek Sanitarium hydrotherapy methods in 1918. The seminary protocol was quite a bit simpler than Dr. Kellogg's protocol, but cut from the same cloth. The following short article was published December 17, 1918. And here it is. On the authority of Dr. Fred Shepard, health officer of Hutchinson City, it may be stated that no public institution in the state of Minnesota has to date made a record in handling influenza, the worldwide epidemic that has swept millions into the grave, like that to the credit of the Hutchinson Seventh-day Adventist Seminary. We're famous. The seminary, with 120 of its 180 students and teachers housed under one roof, was invaded by the malady 3 weeks ago. Symptoms of the malady developed with some 90 of these, and under the direction of Dr. H.E. Larson, a graduate physician, member of the seminary faculty, every person showing indication of sickness was at once put to bed with a trained nurse, taking the temperature and watching the symptoms of the epidemic. Number 2, if those symptoms developed, the patient was required to remain in bed. There were no drugs to be given, but with complete rest and quiet went, number 3, a carefully regulated diet. Number 4, fomentations applied to the throat, chest, and abdomen. This treatment in almost every case reduced the temperature of the patients, and in a day or so, they were apparently well, but that wasn't the end of it. But that did not end the matter with them. The next danger was that of relapse. To guard against this, every patient was required to remain in bed from 2 to 5 days after apparent full recovery, according to the state of their flu affliction. As a result of this system of handling a disease that is scoring thousands of victims every day, there has not been one case that could have been called serious or a single death in the seminary, although there were more than 90 persons affected. The record is remarkable. It makes the ordinary methods of dealing with flu appear irrational, and that was the writer of that article that said that. All right, institution number 3, Tri-City Sanitarium, Moline, Illinois. This is a sister sanitarium to the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Influenza patients chill readily on account of the internal congestion. If only they had a light bath. So even if they are in bed, they must be well protected, especially around the arms, shoulders, and neck. Pneumonia may set in if these precautions are not faithfully taken. It has been my experience, however, that a patient who was put to bed early and given sufficient protection along with the hot hydriatic treatments did not develop pneumonia and was sufficiently recovered from the attack to return to work in a week's time. Life and Health, May 1919. The fever diet. This is Dr. Kellogg's diet protocol for the Spanish flu and diseases causing fever. These are things we're going to need to know as this world gets worse and worse. If you were assigned to come up with a diet that would be beneficial for a fever, where would you start your research? Well, as Christians, I think we would all agree our search should start with the owner's manual. And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be meat." So let's see if Dr. Kellogg's fever diet reflected that. And here it is for influenza, pneumonia, etc. He says, carbohydrates are the most economic of foodstuffs, as they require the least expenditure of energy and give most in return for the energy expended. Malt, sugar, and the sugars of fruits and fruit juices are the foods par excellence for fever cases because of the ease with which they are appropriated and because they are least stimulating and also supply alkaline residues which neutralize the disturbing acids always present and leave behind no toxic residues. Okay. Foods to avoid on a fever diet, according to Dr. Kellogg. By the way, Dr. Kellogg was considered to be the greatest physician in our world by Ellen White. Foods which must be strictly prohibited in fevers are meats of all sorts. Fish, flesh, fowls, oysters, etc. Eggs, mushrooms, pickles, cheese, condiments, and much salt. The liver and kidneys are compelled to do an enormous amount of overwork in fever, in the destruction and elimination of poisons produced by the fever. On this account, the greatest care must be taken to avoid adding burdens to these overworked organs and to lessen their work as much as possible by supplying an abundance of water and by withholding from the patient anything likely to increase renal function. Condiments of all kinds, mustard, pepper, vinegar, must be strictly prohibited. Alcoholic liquors and tea and coffee are especially damaging because of the poisons which they contain. For this reason, also, meat broths, extracts, beef tea, chicken broth, etc. must be strictly avoided, as well as meats themselves. Because of the special tendency to intestinal putrefaction in cases of fever, all foods which have a tendency to putrefy must be prohibited. This is the reason why not only meats of all kinds, but eggs must be discarded. So yes, Kellogg did consult the owner's manual. The open air cure. To achieve the highest level of health, one must have a continuous supply of fresh air, pure air. The highest benefits is achieved with air that is energized by evergreen trees, sunlight, or moving water, such as rain, waterfalls, or the ocean. Breathing cold air is even better. It increases the metabolism. This is from Counsels on Health, page 166. Life in the open air is good for body and mind. It is good medicine for the restoration of health. It is God's medicine for the restoration of health. Pure air, good water, sunshine, the beautiful surroundings of nature, these are his means for restoring the sick to health in natural ways. To the sick, it is worth more than silver or gold to lie in the sunshine or in the shade of the trees. Remember number 7, Dr. Kellogg's Spanish flu protocol, several days mandatory bed rest after fever subsides? That may not have been done indoors for the sake of this fresh air thing. This is Dr. Kellogg speaking. We have a lady at our house. His house was on he bought the whole block. It's a very large block. We have a lady at our house with TB who came a little while ago. Of course, she could not come into the sanitarium since our rules prohibit us from taking into the sanitarium patients suffering from contagious diseases. But we put her into a tent here on my grounds. We supplied her with food from our table and took care of her in a tent. This photo, by the way, was titled one of the tent colonies from the sanitarium, from the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Yes, the sanitarium had multiple tent colonies for infectious patients. That was one of them. Number 4, in 1814, an epidemic of typhus fever at Paris. Some cases were placed in a building in one of the highest and breeziest parts of the city. These cases did infinitely better than those in regular hospitals. Interesting. A breeze, fresh air. In 1854, the sick of the Austrian army have been largely treated during 8 or 9 months in the year in well-ventilated tents in preference to hospitals. The result has been beneficial both as a preventative and curative measure. Interesting. Number 6, Gettysburg Camp Letterman Hospital. Typhoid fever cases treated in tents in the field recovered in larger percentage than those treated in the finely arranged city hospitals. Fresh air and sunlight. From 1900 to 1905, the overall mortality of consumptive patients in open-air wards was less than half that of those who received the orthodox or indoor treatment of the day. Interesting. Number 8, Ireland. Bad housing accommodation in Ireland accounted for a good deal. And unfortunately, in some cases, the replacing of hovels with modern cottages made things, or TB, worse instead of better, because the occupants knew nothing about ventilation, and the plastered houses were airproof as well as weatherproof, whereas the old loosely built houses let the fresh air on all sides, while the expired air escaped by the hole which let out the smoke. Number 9, Camp Brooks. Camp Brooks Emergency Open Air Hospital in Boston. Influenza patients getting sunlight and fresh air. The Surgeon General of the Massachusetts State Guard, William A. Brooks, held that patients did not do as well in an ordinary hospital, no matter how well ventilated. Okay, as they did outdoors. Patients in indoor sun parlors were not exposed to direct sunlight all day as they were when outdoors. He reported that in one general hospital with 76 cases, 20 patients died within 3 days and 17 nurses fell ill. By contrast, according to one estimate, the regimen adopted at the outdoor camp reduced the fatality of hospital cases from 40% to about 13%. Brooks wrote that the efficacy of open-air treatment has been absolutely proven, and one has only to try it to discover its value. This is a statement from the pen of inspiration. The effects produced by living in close, ill-ventilated rooms are these. Hold on, man. The system becomes weak and unhealthy. The circulation, depressed. The blood moves sluggishly through the system because it is not purified and vitalized by the pure, invigorating air of heaven. The mind becomes depressed and gloomy, while the whole system is enervated, and fevers and other acute diseases are liable to be generated. Your careful exclusion of external air and fear of free ventilation leave you to breathe the corrupt, unwholesome air which is exhaled with the lungs of those staying in these rooms, and which is poisonous and unfit for the support of life. The body becomes relaxed, the skin becomes sallow, digestion is retarded, and the system is peculiarly sensitive to the influence of cold. All this is from sealing up your homes and living in it. No fresh air coming in. A slight exposure produces serious disease. Now, that was the end of hers. Testimonies of the Church, Volume 1, page 702. Back to modern days here, COVID versus fresh air. Stay-at-home recommendations may have been a bad idea. This is a quote. In New York, 66% of new hospital admissions for COVID-19 were individuals who had been sequestered at home, indoors. Chinese researchers have noted that a majority of outbreaks in the 320 municipalities reviewed were the result of indoor spread of the disease, with the home accounting for 80% of cases. Whoa. All right, sunlight versus infectious diseases. This is the last section here. COVID versus sunlight. It is now well known that vitamin D is important for innate immunity and that it boosts your immune function against viral diseases. Growing evidence suggests that your vitamin D status may also play an important role in the development of COVID-19 as well as the severity of the illness. Vitamin D concentrates are lower in patients testing positive for COVID. Oh, that's interesting. And countries with lower vitamin D levels have higher mortality rates from COVID-19. Recent research also shows vitamin D levels are strongly correlated to the severity of the illness experienced. Low vitamin D equals increased severity. And these are the references to where that came from. This is from Dr. Mercola. Our stay-at-home orders decimating vitamin D levels. Now, again, the Battle Creek Sanitarium was the greatest hygienic healthcare institution that has ever been. Was the largest and most well-equipped, had the greatest physician in our world, was raised up at God's command, had over 1,000 different baths and therapies, yet sunlight was considered to be one of their most effective treatments. Because sunlight was known to be so effective, Dr. Kellogg provided many options and opportunities for sun exposure. It's true. But I won't go into that right now. And number 10, the sun care clinics of Leysen, Switzerland. Now I have a whole presentation just on this, but this is just a tiny little review, different stuff, just some overviews, summaries, no details, no before and afters. All right, the sun care clinics of Leysen, Switzerland were sun cure treatment facilities. Sunlight and fresh air and a vegetarian diet did the work. All right. Dr. Rollier opened the first high-altitude TB sun cure clinic in 1903 in the Swiss Alps. He specialized in surgical TB cases and called his program the Sun Cure. After finding no help from physicians, many TB patients arrived from the disease-causing shadows and filth of the cities, close to death with deep open sores, distorted frames, wasted muscles, and severe pain on admission. The Sun Cure had an 84% cure rate on dreadful surgical TB patients who were close to death. This was accomplished without the risky, maiming surgeries of the day. That's Dr. Rollier standing there. Dr. Rollier stated, when reaching the age of puberty, all children, or nearly all, have in their bodies the TB germs of this dreadful complaint. Therefore, in order to prevent its outbreak, the germ must be reduced to powerlessness by strengthening the general health. Well, isn't that just novel? In this respect, the air and sun bath is the most powerful of all tonics and health restorers. Who'd have figured? It rebuilds the organism and increases vitality. Experience has taught us that there is no more effective and reliable remedy to this end than sunlight treatment combined with open air and rational exercises. Children, therefore, should have as much sun and air as possible. Now, the benefits of fresh air is not limited to just breathing it. Cool air blowing on the skin is an invigorating tonic. It increases metabolism and acclimates the body to hot and cold and temperature changes. Tanning indoors in a tanning bed does not offer the same health benefits as sunbathing outdoors with a breeze. This is Dr. Rollier again. The sun is an incomparable weapon which nature has placed in the hands of every one of us with which we can all defend ourselves successfully against the manifold ailments threatening us at all ages. This from the world's indisputable authority on sunlight therapy. Even Dr. Kellogg took 2 extended stays at Layson to learn from Dr. Rollier himself. This is what Dr. Rollier had to say in summarizing what Dr. Kellogg had to say summarizing Dr. Rollier's sun cure. The success of the open air and sun treatment of tuberculosis is one of the notable triumphs of modern scientific medicine. Thanks to the work of Dr. Finson, Rain, Dr. Rollier, and numerous others, this method of dealing with cases of tubercular infection has become known to the whole civilized world and has been the means of saving many thousands of sufferers who otherwise would have been doomed to an early death. The results obtained by this mode of treatment have really been so wonderful as to be almost incredible. So for much more details and before and after images and stories of Dr. Rollier's sun cure, see my presentation called The Sun Cure at thesuncure.com or The Sun Cure on YouTube. This presentation was just a quick summary of how the pioneers successfully treated infectious diseases using God's hygienic methods alone. And again, to reiterate, soon these agencies of nature will be the only health care available to us. God is preparing his people for his coming and for the coming crises and showing us the better way. And that is the end of that presentation. Thank you for watching. I am done.